The following is a conversation with Grisha Kruglov. Grisha is a principal software engineer working at Microsoft. He works on the Azure Communication Services team. Grisha, prior to joining Microsoft, worked with Mozilla as a senior staff software engineer. In this episode, Grisha shares his journey from Mozilla to Microsoft, what's it like being a principal software engineer, how other people can become a top-tier software engineer, and his thoughts on how valuable a degree is versus a bootcamp. Hope you guys enjoy. Welcome to the show, Grisha. The first question I have for you is, so you're a principal software engineer at Microsoft. Now, what is the level of responsibility of a principal software engineer?
Yeah, I guess that varies from context, right? So principal in Microsoft is many different levels, right? Like so at Microsoft specifically, principal is 3 levels, right? And then the level of scope and responsibility will vary based on that. So there's at Microsoft 65, 66, and 67, and there's a pretty giant gap between 65 and 67, for example. Yeah, so I think as far as and then it's also context dependent on which teams you're in and kind of your skill set, right? If you're more of a generalist, if you're more a specialist, right, you could be highly specialized in some tech stack and pretty narrow focused on getting like a single kind of a slice of a product just right. Could be a specialist in some technology, like maybe like a WebRTC, guru, right? And then they'll be in working on some like pretty arcane stuff deep down in the stack, or you could be floating amongst 3 or 4 or 5 or more teams, helping them out with their problems and kind of driving cross-organizational projects. So it really, yeah. So it depends is the answer, but it could, yeah, basically can be all of those things pretty easily, yeah, for people. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then yeah, like so that's Microsoft, right? Like other companies, like they have like the word principal is very loaded at this point. There's a lot of title inflation happening, and it's kind of all over the place, right? Yeah. So we have to kind
just
of
to give people a bit more context, so initially you mentioned like these numbers 66, 67.
Mhm.
Can you just give that context? Like, what does that mean?
Yeah, so these are I don't know Microsoft leveling too well. Like where does it start? Like 50 something, right? But
Yeah,
it's
15.
just basically I think elsewhere, right? People use like things like L7 or L8. Basically, right? You start from like I just graduated school. Like you can think of it as your starting level, and then slowly you progress towards like medium, senior, whatever, staff level, principal level, and then Microsoft put numbers to that, right? And then as you progress, you go up in like basically like a game, you level up, right? It's yeah. So for them, for some reason, I don't really know why 66 or 65 is where their principal starts. I think 64 is second level of senior, that sort of thing. And you probably start off at like 50 something, 52 maybe. I don't know. As like a fresh grad. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's at 59 for Microsoft. So basically, just for the
Oh
audience,
yeah. Okay.
ranking
Cool.
system for engineers.
Yeah.
Well, I guess let's backtrack a little bit. So walk me through your tech journey. Like, what's the
Mm.
initial starting phase of your like this tech career? What made you interested in tech? And like, how did you manage, like, what's from you starting in tech to now becoming a principal software engineer at Microsoft? Like, what are the steps that happen in this journey?
Yeah. Yeah. So I got interested. I don't know. So when I started, tech wasn't really a term I knew. It was just I got interested in programming when I was a kid, thanks to my parents. They were both like in kind of in adjacent fields. My dad is a software engineer as well. So I kind of was exposed to that stuff from younger age. And we had a good school. We had programming classes in our school. Like I think we like in grade 5 we had like binary math, like doing math with like in binary system and that sort of thing, like as part of the programming classes there. So kind of got like interested in that stuff pretty early. Did a lot of like web development as when I was like a teenager because it was fun. And yeah, and then I studied like a bit. I have a very conventional kind of a geeky path, right? Like as a kid, you start to get interested in this stuff, then you do some pet projects, do some web dev on the side because it's fun. I started computer science in university. I did consulting work, freelance work to kind of help pay for school. I did internships as part of my schooling. I worked for Research in Motion, as a Canadian company that made Blackberries as for like 3 co-op terms or internships in Canada. Yeah, so that was sort of the beginnings, I guess. Yeah, and then afterwards, I was always really interested in startups. Like I kind of grew up on the startup culture in like reading Paul Graham's essays and all that stuff, like following Y Combinator. So I like the first thing I did after leaving school is join a startup, and I did that for I think I did it was one, and then we did our own startup for about a year. Then I joined another startup. So there's like a few hops in there, and then a bunch of projects in between. Just yeah, kind of learning all sorts of various things, and like all of these were pretty broad, like full stack development, like front end, back end stuff, like embedded development at some point. But basically, you're just like a jack of all trades, doing whatever, doing DevOps, deploying to servers, writing C code for like embedded devices, writing Rails, Ruby on Rails, or like whatever you know you gotta do to ship a product quickly. You know, like in the startup world, you have like a pretty. It's not like working at Microsoft where you just sit there. You can be here for years working on something, right? Like there, you have a pretty, you know, you have a runway, and and it's gonna end, and at that point, the company's done, unless it, you know, raises more money or succeeds or makes money somehow, right? So there's a lot of pressure and kind of a lot of urgency. So and then at some point I realized that like what I really wanted to do is work on the web platform, right? Make basically I realized how important the internet is as a platform for humanity, and just yeah, like it's such a unique kind of invention, and I wanted to make that better and just be part of groups of people who are working on to make that better. So I applied to Mozilla and then got a job, and then 6 years of that, yeah, happened afterwards. So I did a lot of mobile development stuff, working on mobile Firefox at Mozilla, and then at some point decided that was enough, and then ended up in Microsoft as a principal engineer. That's kind of a I don't know, bird's level overview of the career, I guess. Yeah.
Well, I guess, yeah, just to give people some context, Mozilla is the company behind Firefox, the browser. So I guess just into that segment, that stint of your life at Mozilla, you mentioned you worked at like with app in app development in that scope. Like what thing in particular was it that like you were primarily responsible for during that?
Yeah, different things. So when I applied for a mobile kind of what do you call it? I think the title they used for the job posting was a front end browser engineer, which so when you talk about browsers, they're kind of, people think of them as having backends. Backend for a browser would be like the rendering engine, for example, like WebKit or Gecko. Something that actually, you know, JavaScript engines, and like something that renders HTML, CSS, and does layout and stuff. And then the front end is everything else, basically, right? Everything is to do with user interfaces, with like all of the other stuff that's involved in making a browser. So I worked on the front end of the browsers, and specifically on the mobile browsers. So mostly Firefox for Android. And then a bit of iOS. Yeah, and then kind of like I did, like, it was like a pretty long, well, by Mozilla standards, it's not that long. People spend whole lifetimes there. But yeah, it was like six and a half years. So I got to do a lot of just straight up, like, you know, going and fixing bugs in some UI layer somewhere, right? Did a lot of that at first, and then kind of ended up specializing in storage systems and data synchronization and accounts integrations and that sort of stuff. So when you like take a mobile browser and sign in into your Firefox account and synchronize data, and like your bookmarks appear, and then like your browsing history moves around. So I worked on that stuff, and for a while, and then we did, and then there was a lot of other projects sort of in between, and at some point ended up contributing to a rewrite. We basically rewrote mobile Firefox for Android version, based on like we split it into like kind of reimagined what is the what sort of components and building blocks do you need to actually create a browser, and then we wrote those, and then out of them we assembled the new version, and kind of relaunched that, and that was part of that whole process from beginning to end, and that was really fun. Ended up doing a lot of REST work for some shared component stuff, and yeah, so there's a lot of projects in there basically, but from anything from generalized, like basically I think at some point I really touched most of the front end code base, but mostly specializing in storage accounts, sync systems, and kind of helping other people to be like more productive. I really like developer productivity stuff, so I spent much of my time, making our build systems a bit better, or try to contribute to that at least.
Yeah, that was one of the questions I had as well. Is like, because you had experience working on a browser, like how does a browser actually work? But I guess you touched on it briefly.
Yeah.
But I guess if there's any other info you can share on like the specific architecture, the things that go behind like making a complete browser come to life.
Yeah, I think that's like way beyond our chat. There's like a lot of stuff, right? But you could very roughly, I suppose, you can imagine it as like, so you have the rendering part, right? So Gecko in Firefox is the rendering engine, and within that lives the whole networking stack, which Mozilla implements, for example, all of the encryption stuff, all of the stuff that actually renders a web page, downloads a web page, renders a web page, does all of the security stuff, sandboxing, JavaScript, HTML, CSS, all of that is one big giant component. And then you have sort of the Chrome of the browsers, they call it, stuff that interacts with that big giant component, right? It's like, so your URL bar, you're typing in the address, right? You have favicons, you have browsing history, bookmarking, data synchronization, like all of the other stuff, right? That's just taking a web page and rendering it doesn't really make a full browser, right? There's a lot of other stuff involved. Like when, for example, you highlight a visited link on the web page, right, in a different color, right? So that's the back end of the browser interacting with the front end of the browser, asking, so I just visited this web page, tell me which links have this user visited before, right? And then there's like a bunch of message passing around. Then there is, things like add-on and extension systems, right, where you have bits of the front end code are able to interact directly and extend capabilities of the backend, basically, right? Or like interject some functionality into it. And so you have many layers like that and many subsystems, and they're all kind of interact. It's a giant, complicated thing that I don't know. I'm not sure if there's like a single person who like really understands how it all works on like any significant level. People tend to specialize in like there is like a few kind of genius level type people out there, right, who like really know their stuff and like are able to be super productive in like any part of that stack. Most people specialize in something. So I specialize in the front end stuff, and then even within that, in like slices of it, right? Because there's just a lot of complexity involved, and it's kind of, you can kind of page it into your brain for a while and like understand it, and then like right now I'll struggle to explain how data sync works probably in Firefox, in like 5 minutes, but then I used to work on it actively, right? So it's so it's kind of it's hard to just do like a napkin explanation of a browser, but basically, yeah, downloads a bunch of HTML, renders it, displays it to a user. Some level, it's not that hard conceptually.
And then from that, working with with Mozilla
Yeah.
I believe for 6 years you worked there?
6.5. Yeah, 6.5.
And then that transition to Microsoft. Well, I have a couple questions about that transition. We'll go into it like step by step. Well, I guess one is what was some of the biggest changes? Well, obviously the project itself changed because you used to work on browsers. And well, I guess now, what do you work on Microsoft? Just for the audience has a bit more context.
Yeah, so I'm part of the Azure Communication Services org. So we build what's the term? CPaaS, right? Communication Platform as a Service. So which is a lot of things, but basically any communication type thing you would like to do as a business or as an organization, we provide you building blocks for that, right? So if you would like to send an SMS message or send an email, or if you'd like to build like a Zoom-like application, for example, with video, whatever, sharing, streaming, voice communication, right? So we're building SDKs, and then kind of the providing some of the backend support for that sort of thing. And what I work on is within that we have kind of sub-orgs, right? And so currently the stuff I'm doing is kind of more like, I think the term is foundational, which is basically kind of underlying services that kind of are supporting a lot of the more user-facing SDKs and things. So we're working on basically a bunch of service stuff that like is kind of invisible when you're interacting with the end product, but it kind of sits there in a supporting role. A bunch of backend services, basically.
Yeah. Well, I guess so that's what you do at Microsoft, and then from a transition from Mozilla to Microsoft, what were some of the key differences? Key differences outside of like actually the project changing, perhaps the tech stack changing. Some of the differences that you've noticed, or like the way the two companies do their business. Like, what were some of the key things that were like just stood out immediately during that transition period?
Yeah, they're completely different organizations. Like, it's very difficult to compare. There's some similarities, but I think there's more differences than similarities. So Mozilla is very small. I think right now it's maybe like 900 people. Kind of floats around that mark, plus or minus. And so the teams are very small, and engineers tend to do a lot more than they do here as a result, right? Like you have large scope, not a lot of people. So like each individual person is capable of doing a lot more stuff, basically, or they kind of have to, right? Like I mentioned, people specialize, but like even that, like pretty deep and broad specializations. And so that was a big thing, is like you coming to Microsoft and like the teams there's a lot more people. Like just our org, I don't know, it's like half of Mozilla, and the scope is like it's a little hard to compare, but it definitely feels like the scope of role is quite a bit smaller. The problems are very different in nature, right? Mozilla is not really a business. It's kind of hard to think of it as a business. It's like this weird nonprofit org that kind of exists because it gets enough advertising revenue from Google and some other sources, and so there's not a lot of like kind of business pressures, and there's no customers buying your products. There's no businesses buying your services. It's a very different operating model, and so like your basic operating day-to-day life is very different there. People could be just working for years on some part of some web API, right, and kind of slowly moving that forward. but like, and I'm sure that exists at Microsoft as well, right? Microsoft does a lot of like platform foundational work, right? Like, but it's like what we do in ACS is a bit like that, but it's also very customer driven, and very much, you're very much building a business. Like there is revenue goals, right? And like the goal is to make money. It's to build useful products and services and to make money. That's really not a goal at Mozilla. And I think that like the goal of Mozilla is to build a healthy internet, right? That's and so those basically, yeah. So as a result, I think you end up with a pretty different like day-to-day experience. Um, so on some level, yeah, people are sitting in front of computers and writing code, but like incentives are different and kind of motivations are different. So that's a big change, I think. Yeah, like you mentioned, like tech stack. Yeah, I don't think of that as a very like. So it doesn't. I don't think it matters that much, right? Like the stuff changes over time. And when I started Mozilla, we did a lot of Java, and we did a lot of Kotlin, and I did a lot of Rust, and some JavaScript in between, and Python, and whatever, right? So the tech stack is going to change under you, and things evolve, right? And then even here, we're adopting a lot of Rust, and like, but today it's .NET, and like in 2 years you'll be writing services in Rust. Who knows? So like that changes, but like the fact that yeah, the fundamental nature of the business is much more stable over time, right? And that's probably a bigger component.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one
Yeah.
question I had was, so as a principal software engineer, like how involved are you into like with the leadership team, or like the product managers, or people, not necessarily managers, but like the product team who like define, or the people who define where the product is going. So like just taking Microsoft as an example.
Yeah.
Like at Microsoft, the people who define, like the leadership team, like, okay, this is the direction we want the product to go. How much input do you have in there? Does like the leadership bounce off ideas off of you, or like what's the process there like? Like how involved are you in that process?
I think it so like if you take me personally, I'm not that involved for a few reasons, right? I'm fairly new here, so I don't really have a lot of organizational sort of, you know, kind of historical knowledge, right? And like when you're like, it takes time for people to trust you, basically, right? So like it takes a few years to actually build a trust in like, oh, if Grisha says something, like let's listen to that, right? So by default, there is a level of trust you gain when you join the company, right? Like they did hire you and they are paying you money to do something useful. Um, but like on kind of organizational level, that takes time for you. Like you have to kind of prove yourself, right? That you're, you know, your judgment is sound, and that sort of thing, right? And then you prove that by, you know, like people trust you with something and you do well, and over time they see the capability, right? And they're especially if you have like some kind of a business acumen a bit, right? And you understand, like I think at that level you kind of have to understand the business as well, right? And I'm like, and this is like entirely new area for me, so I'm basically right now I'm focusing on that fundamental like step of like, well, understanding what the hell we're doing, right? And gaining trust of others by doing good work on like a more of a, you know, like, oh, we have a bunch of tech debt. Like, how can I help? How can I be helpful, right? Oh, we need to scale some service. I'm gonna help there. So basically doing a lot of crud work, really, like solving bugs and like figuring out root causes for issues and things. And I think over time, right, like if you choose to, in a place like Microsoft, right, you could continue building that technical expertise, and you could kind of like cross over into more product leadership if you would like, right? Like I think like being a good product person while also being deeply technical is like a superpower. A lot of product people they don't come from technical backgrounds, right? And but if you're building a, you know, a computational platform of sorts, you really need that, right? You need that understanding. So so over time, yeah, like that's and you definitely see, you know, engineering leaders being heavily involved in product decisions at Microsoft, right? Like that's, I think that's very, very true here, right? Like a lot of you look up the commanding chain, right? There's like people are really technical on average. So yeah, so and as a principle of, I think at some point the expectation as you continue moving up, like I'm pretty at Microsoft, I'm at the bottom of that rank basically, right? So, but like as you continue moving up, yeah, you're probably gonna play a bigger role. Yeah, it's like you'll basically be, if you'd like, kind of a partner to your engineering leaders and like and product leaders. But like that also, you know, kind of depends, right, on if that's something you actually care about doing. There's always plenty of just technical work that doesn't involve these kind of organizational things. So that's another specialty you can do. Yeah.
Yeah. And then where in your career, leveling up like through the software engineering path, like going deeper into the field, where if this ever happened, did you make that transition from being like a reactive type of software engineer to like a proactive? But I'm sure like at a principal level, because you're the ones expected, I would assume, like driving initiatives, like telling what's needed to be done, like from a technical standpoint. Whereas my assumption is like someone in their junior roles is much more of a reactive roles. Like the tasks are defined for you, and then you pick, okay, I'll help out here, I'll help out here. Where was that like transition, like a reactive to proactive, if any, or were you proactive from the start? Like what was your approach as you started?
Yeah. So my background is like this was always a hobby for me to begin with, and still is a hobby, right? I go home and I do some coding, and so and no one tells you like what hobby, you know, project to work on, right? Like it's something you pick yourself, right? And so from day one, I think, right, like my main interest was like I just want to build interesting stuff, right? I like this as a product. Like I actually enjoy the process of software, of building software, right? And so so like my start in this was building my own stuff. And then when you join startups, there's no one to tell you what to do, really. In like especially really early stage startups, there is like, you know, you have a general idea what you'd like to do. There's some goal, right? Some kind of like there's a really tight feedback cycle if you're lucky with customers. But basically, you have a free reign in how you do stuff, what you do, or what you're doing, what technologies you use, right? So you're kind of like a little principal engineer of a team of one, right? From day one. So which is nice. You know, like it has severe downsides in the sense that there's usually no mentorship, right? No one to tell you when you're going off rails. You kind of like run into a wall full speed and you won't even realize it, right? Until it's too late. And then you kind of like have to figure out, okay, what now? How do we undo this, you know, mess that we've created? And this could mean the end of that startup, right? Because you've created too much of a mess, technically, and you can't undo in time. So I think for me that started pretty early, basically. And then when I joined Mozilla, for example, like you start off like, yeah, okay, there's a bunch of bugs, and people assign, you know, your manager assigns you bugs. But very early, my manager that told me like, I'm not gonna tell you like what to work on. You pick something that's like you feel is the most broken thing or like needs the most attention, and you can help there, and you go and own that, take ownership, right? And so I was told that from basically like my first week at Mozilla, right? And like go take ownership of something and make that better. And that was it. Like that was basically the guidance for like that lasted me the 6 years, right? You just pick the most broken thing and you try to make it better. Yeah, within your abilities, right? Like some things are just, you know, like you won't be able to help. It's like beyond your scope, beyond what you maybe you won't even recognize they're broken, right? It looks fine to you, but like at this, you know, later on you realize how terrible this is. But yeah, pretty early on, you should be, I think, thinking in that terms of like just like, okay, what can I do to help, and taking ownership of that process. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Just to add on, because initially, like you mentioned, you do this like as a love, like as a hobby as well, like building stuff. So
Yeah.
just to add a comment for the audience as well, is like you have a really awesome thing in your like LinkedIn bio, which is like life's too short for bad software, which I absolutely
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah. But I guess okay, so I guess we'll transition into just some general advice that you have for people. The first question I have is what is the best way now to learn programming? Someone zero experience, doesn't know anything. What is the best way that they can get started?
By programming, I think. Like, I don't know if now is any different from from when I learned it. I did it by doing projects that I wanted to see happen, right? Like, I was early on, I was like, I still am like really into music, and I wanted to visualize my music habits, music listening habits, right? So I built stuff like to do that, and it's just for me and my friends, right? And so, and then as you're doing that, you start with like no knowledge of like whatever JavaScript, some like Python to scrape some data, and then but you have a goal in your head, you have a vision of what you want to create, and then you like slowly chip away at it, and then you have some results, and you learn a bunch of stuff in the process. So how you get, internet has so much knowledge. There's so many good books out there for like all sorts of different levels of programming that yeah, I'm not really sure. I think it really depends like how like as an individual, how do you learn best, right? So like some people learn really well in a school like environment where they have like specific curriculum to work through. They have gradings, they have feedback cycles. Some people learn by doing, right? You really kind of have to understand what sort of learner are you, and kind of lean into that, right? So I'm a mix. Like I read a lot of books, but I really need to learn in context of doing something, right? And there's also no like trick to this, right? So Peter Norvig has this great essay. I think, what is it called? Learn programming in 10 years, right? Like you basically like that's kind of the span of time it will take you, right, to actually build something, see that collapse, rebuild it, kind of learn from your mistakes, try different things, get really involved in like I don't know, linting, and like really care about coding style, and then realize that it doesn't matter, and then change your opinion again, and like kind of over time this will evolve, and you just like there's no shortcut to this, right? Like the 3 months bootcamp you can do will only get you very like surface level knowledge, and then after that will be like years and years and years of hard work basically, like, if you want to get anywhere good. So yeah, you learn by doing basically. Like there's I would highly advise doing like a computer science degree or something of that nature, right, to get to like learn about Turing machines and like finite state machines and things, right, and like kind of the math behind that stuff, and like build a bunch of random things in assembly, right, and like learn about distributed systems and their theory, and like relational algebra as opposed to just like how to write SQL statements. Like that stuff is you're like it's usually you're not gonna encounter this stuff in work, because like no one's gonna like ask you like, oh, can you like translate your SQL statements into relational algebra equations, right? Like it's not gonna happen, but like that's exactly what you'll do in universities, right? And kind of analyze things and kind of think of it from like more fundamental points of view, and that's super valuable. But you don't need to do this too. You can just like plenty of people just go and hack on stuff, right? So I'm a big proponent of open source work, and a lot of open source projects will gladly take contributions, and then they'll mentor you and will take your commits and or pull requests and like help you refine them, right? And then kind of give you feedback and things. I think that's a great way to learn, right? As Mozilla, we did a lot of that stuff. We had people contributing to like pretty big parts of the browser, and just from the like just random people from the internet, right? And then we'll take time to give them feedback and guide them and mentor them, and help them be better developers and learn how to contribute to like a really big project. And I think that's still, you can go and do this stuff today, right? And then you'll have world-class engineers giving you feedback one-to-one on your work. So like open source provides that ability. I think it's very unique in that, and people don't take enough advantage of it in that sense. So I think if you lean into that world, that's a really nice way to learn.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to touch on, so you mentioned like world-class engineer, that part. Just a question, like just using that as a segue, is what
Yeah.
are the things you've noticed is like these small points of difference between like this top 1%, like upper echelon software engineers versus like your like people who are in like the
Yeah.
big intermediate stage? Like what are the things that like over a long, like say a 10-year time scale, there's some people that will be like intermediate seniors, where some like as yourself, like principals and beyond. Like what are those things that like then that pay dividends like as time progresses, like those things that perhaps it's like like a different type of mindset that they approach when coming to like problem solving, or like a really deep technical knowledge of something, like what are
Yeah. So yeah, I get that. Yeah. So I'll preface it with like, I don't know, like it's like I just want to say I don't think of I have a severe imposter syndrome. I don't think of myself as a world-class engineer. Like I'm just trying to do my best, sort of a thing, right? I think that's a pretty common thing you'll see in a lot of people at like in like well-known companies, right? They're just they're faced with like big monumental tasks, right? They have big problems to work on, and a lot of the better ones don't. They have really good empathy to others, so I think that helps. Like that's a pretty common thing I see, and like because that it helps for you to understand your users, your colleagues, your PMs, whoever, right? And empathize with yourself as well, like in the past and the future. Like if you're working on a program, you're really collaborating with yourself over time, right? So that kind of, it's a really cool, really nice thing to have, right? Like develop level of empathy. And you're also not like assholes don't really get promoted, right? So it's like no one wants to work with people they don't like, right? So you kind of have to not like yeah, I don't know what how to phrase that, right? But like basically be a nice person, right? Like genuinely a good person, or try to be, at least aspire to. So that's one thing. Another thing is like actually doing the work, like not getting like sucked into the whatever. Oh, I'm like an architect, so I'm just gonna like sit in documents and like write out diagrams and things, right? Like there's definitely a level of that you have to do, but it's also really helpful to actually just go and do the work that needs to happen, like whatever needs to happen for a project to succeed, right? Like it could be just like refactoring a bunch of stuff so that it's more testable, so that the team can move faster. It could be like helping with the build systems. It could be all sorts of really kind of crummy work that a lot of people, they want to build a shiny new feature, right? But like real life software engineering is very often not building shiny new features. Is like you have this humongous code base and you're just trying to make it better, with some goal in mind, right? So whatever helps you achieve that goal, and you go and do that, and you don't think of like, oh, this is like beyond me or whatever. It should be like a job of a more junior person. Like once you start thinking in those terms, I don't know. I think it starts to limit your potential. At some point, like your scope expands, right? And then you have to delegate a lot, but you kind of you have to still touch grass and go and contribute day to day. So what's the Chris Hadfield, I think the Canadian astronaut, right? He had this like cool quote I liked, is when you join an organization, you could be like a one or a zero, right? A one in his case was like, oh, I joined. You look around and you see things that are wrong, and you're like, oh, I'm gonna like contribute and like make them better, right? And the zero being like you join and you just want to help. Like, oh, what's the annoying thing that other people don't want to do? You'll go do that part, right? And you help out and you just be useful and like make their lives easier. And so his advice was basically you start with being a good zero, right? Before you even think of like trying to like change things and like refactor the world, right? And like tell people what to do, because you have to understand the context in which they live, kind of the code base, the history of things, right? The business products you're building on some deeper level, right? And you only get there by doing the crummy work. or having done it, like similar things in the past, and then you have like things to relate to. Yeah, that's like another shortcut, but like that comes from doing the crummy work, right? And if you don't enjoy that work, you're gonna have a really hard time actually getting anywhere. So you have to kind of like, if you're not enjoying refactoring large code bases, yeah, like maybe rethink that path, right? As a career. So.
Yeah.
But at least from my point of view, you kind of have to enjoy the work to get good at it. So I think, I don't know, maybe other people operate differently. So that's kind of, yeah. So humility, empathy, ability to just go and do the stuff that needs to happen. Yeah, not leading into your ego, not drinking the Kool-Aid, you know, like realizing like this is a very privileged position to be in, right? So just try to be helpful to others. Don't be an asshole. Write good code. Yeah, like care about the users. I think those are pretty basic, you know, characteristics. Yeah.
Yeah, no, definitely. Those are like the key, especially on a long, like as time progresses, as you go to like a year scale, a decade-long scale, like the tiny differences, like you can see like your upper echelon of engineers and like the others, like
Yeah. Yeah, and it adds up, right? Like, and there's a compounding effect to it, right? So like the more time you spend like really caring about the small things, right? The better you get at that, and then it compounds, and you build taste and you build intuition. And next time you see stuff, like your brain is like, oh, I recognize these patterns. I worked on this before, right? Or like I've seen how this project will go. And you can imagine, oh, you know, you can join the team, and you can see a bunch of like weird things happening, and you know why they happen and how to change them, right? Because you've like over time, right, you build that experience and your brain kind of latches on to patterns. So that kind of works well. And another thing is like you said like it's like a decade-long process, right? Which is very true. So I think it matters that people, well, anyway, so I'm maybe not in building like the deep technical expertise, but at least in like actually sustaining that long career, like be very mindful of things like burnout, right? Like people who, you know, get to like really high levels, they've, you know, they somehow either like recovered from deep burnouts, right? Or were able to like be conscious enough, right? Of like skirting that line. Because like it will screw you up, right? Over time, if you're not careful, right? Especially if you're like really engaged in the work and there's plenty of it and it's always like non-ending, right? It's very easy to just overwork yourself. So be very mindful of that and just like take care of, you know, mental health, physical health, that sort of thing. Because like it's a long-term, you can like work non-stop for a few years, but it will catch up to you, right? And just realizing like it's not a sprint, you know, it's a marathon sort of a thing. Sometimes it is a sprint and you have to sprint, but just know that like, okay, you have to slow down and recover, and then to actually continue, right? Or you just injure yourself. It's basically like sports in a way, right? Just kind of play out over longer time periods.
Yeah. Well, I guess, yeah, moving on to another question I had, which was something you already touched on earlier a little bit, which is like the importance of a degree. So you get like a much more holistic understanding to things. Even if, as you mentioned, like you don't particularly use some of that stuff in your day-to-day work, it still grants you that ability to know, like have the holistic view of things. This is a question I get a lot on this channel, on like some of the videos that I've made on how to learn programming and stuff. And my approach is like always just learn the fundamentals first, like just, I don't know, with Python, like just the basic concepts, variables, function, classes, etc. Then like use your life as an inspiration. Like say you play a lot of, I don't know, like Call of Duty, like make your own version of that. Like that's how I learned programming as well. And like when I make like those type of videos, a lot of people ask like, do I really need a degree to get into tech? Like can a boot camp be sufficient? I know you touched upon this earlier, but like any specific advice that you have for people, like is a degree really that useful in programming? Is it essential to make a career in tech? boot camps, how valuable are they? Like the people doing online courses. Like my personal journey has been like I don't have a degree as of
Yeah.
right now, but it's just been with online courses. Like just doing online courses, just a lot of trial and error, building apps, building like websites and so on. So yeah, so what's your take on that? Like degree versus boot camps?
Yeah, I don't think you can make any definitive statements. Just from the fact that like you can trivially find people who have succeeded at like really high levels via all sorts of different paths, right? Some people got degrees and then did stuff. Some people learned by themselves, right? And learned the fundamentals and all sorts of things and succeeded. And some people went to boot camps and then got jobs and learned. And so yeah, like it's yeah, all of those things will work. It may again like so much of it depends on like, can you afford a 4-year degree? Do you have the time? Are you what life stage are you in? Is that something you can do? Or do you need to like support a family, right? And then you can only afford like to take half a year off your job, right? And you don't really have a lot of options, right? Then like, okay, yeah, looking at some bootcamp or some self-study or whatever. I think tech is fairly egalitarian in the sense that, like in a good sense of that word, meaning like if you're able to do good stuff, you're able to get good work, and like you don't really like it's not like, oh, you need to have a like like to be a doctor you can't just self-study, right? Like there's a pretty definitive simple answer. You want to be a doctor, you go into medical school, right? You get a proper education, right? So tech isn't like that. So it's like it's a blessing and a curse, right? But like if you want to get into it, I think find a way in which you learn best and kind of like really be honest with yourself and lean into that way. Like if you think you'll succeed in like a 12-hour a day boot camp where like so much stuff is crammed into your head in like a small amount of time, and you think if you think you can get value out of it, or if it just sounds like a lot of stress and like you'll just burn out, like make that call for yourself, right? Like 4-year degree gives you time, right? It gives you flexibility to explore all sorts of things. You're gonna study math, right? You're not gonna study math in a boot camp, right? And like how helpful is that gonna be? Well, it depends, right? Like you'll study discrete graph theory and stuff, discrete math, and like that's gonna be pretty helpful in lots of things. But you can also go and just like watch MIT open courseware videos and look at the same lectures online, right? So if you have enough self-motivation to do that without like paying for a degree and going to class and having that schedule, if you can do like it's really personal, right? So you just kind of like be honest with yourself about how you learn, what works for you, and kind of lead into that. And tech itself is like, yeah, can you like do useful things? Yes, okay, cool. If you as long as you're able to demonstrate, like degree is a way to demonstrate some knowledge. Boot camps are kind of similar. So big interesting projects are also play the same role, right? So for a lot of people, they replace degrees, right, for their initial interviews to get their the first step, right? Like if you build a bunch of cool stuff and you can show that to people and like talk about it and explain it in detail, like that could be enough, right, to get a first job and then kind of move on from there.
Yeah, because a lot of
Yeah.
people that, especially like I've talked to, like in my comments and stuff, with people they look at job requirements, like their goal is just to get a tech job, like no matter what. Like big tech companies, Facebook, Google, Amazon, like just give me a tech job. And one of the main requirements, usually in the last couple of years, was like a mandatory software engineering degree, like a computer science degree. Like that's the first requirement. Nowadays, I mean, it's still a requirement, but I think there have been people who don't have a degree that have been able to get into the tech world. So now they see a path. And so a lot of people have this confusion, like, is my for they can afford it, they can go to university, like say in that scenario. Would you still say to someone that like have the means of going to university, like it's still in the long run beneficial? If the goal is just to get a job, like just give me like a software engineering job.
Um, yeah, I think if you're trying to hyper optimize for time, like if the goal is to like, I want a job as soon as possible, and it needs to be a tech job, yeah, like you probably don't need a degree. You can bypass that, build a bunch of projects, do a lot of self-study, and you can kind of backdoor your way into most companies, I would say. You have to be pretty good and very motivated. And yeah, I don't think that's a good general advice. Like it will definitely work, right? For some people. Yeah, like I don't know, it's hard to say, right? Like, so I would say if you can afford it, if you have the time and desire, go study comp sci. It'll help. It'll be interesting. You'll learn a bunch of stuff. There'll be a lot of stuff that you don't need for the job, which will also be helpful. I studied a lot of philosophy while in university. I really like that. It helps me throughout life, right? Like I got a lot of exposure to all sorts of things. Like university education is just wonderful, right? Like it's like 4 years of like go and study things. Like you're never gonna have that time and space usually, unless you're really like, I don't know, become financially independent afterwards, like work for like 15, 20 years and then like go and like do other things in your life, right? Like maybe then you have time. But like it's a very unique thing. I wouldn't rob myself of that. Like I'm very happy I did university. I did a lot of stuff I would not be exposed to otherwise. And you meet a lot of cool people and you build connections, and like it's going to help you with the jobs as well, right? Later on, like the people you study with are going to go and do interesting things, right? They're going to work for companies. Yeah, some of them will start companies. You can start companies with them, right? It's like it's a cool network. So that's a big part of it too, right? Which like you're not going to really get by sitting and in your bedroom just like lead coding, right? I don't know, maybe nowadays people like go on discords and build that stuff elsewhere, but I think university is really nice in the sense that like you'll also have a lot of free time, which will let you explore topics in much more depth, right, than like 3 or 4 months bootcamp will allow you. Because like you're taking like 5 classes a semester, right? Like you probably have like 80% of your day free usually, or like 60% of your day free. Like some classes, some assignments here and there, but like lots of time to explore things. And you're kind of forced to, explore different things, not just like, oh, I need to like learn how to like, I don't know, React works. Like they're not going to teach you about React in university, or like that's something you have to learn yourself anyway afterwards, right? So like if your goal is to get a job as a web developer, you're doing React stuff, well, yeah, like that's don't bother with a computer science degree. Do something else. If your goal is to I don't know, like learn a lot of interesting things and build a lasting career, I think comp sci degree is a better start to that. Then yeah, but like that's just it's also my personal bias, right? Because that's how I did it. So and like I haven't lived the other way, so I don't know. But I've certainly seen people who don't have any university degrees. It's not an environment for them. They don't do well in that world, but they're absolutely amazing engineers, and they did extremely well for themselves. There's plenty of examples like that, so it all can work. Yeah. So
definitely. I've also been a massive advocate for university, although I'm still like in between. I mean, I don't have a degree, but I do want a degree as well. So, but I've always been an advocate for university, because I think you can't get that experience anywhere. And then for something that's like you can't replace universities ever. Like you're not going to be a doctor, as you mentioned, like from a YouTube video or something like that.
Well, it depends. Like can you learn medicine enough to like go and help someone out? Yeah. Like, are you going to be able to practice in the hospital? No. So it's really like, what are you trying to get out of this, right? It's like similar in programming, right? You can go and learn programming as a tool to help you in your other work, right? Like it's a very universally applicable skill. You don't need to be a software engineer to program, right? Like plenty of people are doing programming in Excel or like in all sorts of different, like, you're like a civil engineer, you're writing code. Or it will help you if you're writing code, right? You're an urban planner. It will help you to be able to run code to analyze data that cities produce about how they operate, and so you can make better decisions. So like learning to program and getting a tech job, like there could be one and the same, but like I would just advocate also learning to program is a useful life skill in like in whatever path you're going to go in, right? And like tech jobs are very they're not for everyone, right? Like it's a pretty specific sort of activity. So like I think, right, especially in the past, in the recent like 10 years, we've seen this giant boom, right? Like the salaries went through the roof, right? You're hearing people of like out of school getting crazy salaries. I think that's done, right? Like it's still a really well paid career, but like no one's going to give you 200k USD out of school nowadays. Like that, I don't think that's a thing that happens. Like maybe in a few unique cases, but like we're just in a very different economic environment now, right? And so if you're thinking like, oh, I'm gonna get a tech job and be rich, and that's your sole motivation, I think you may have a pretty bad time and be pretty miserable in the process. If it's not really a thing for you, right? Like just chasing money and joining a career for that is, I don't know. I don't think it's a good way to live life. It can lead to a lot of misery. Like it's a pretty, like if you don't enjoy sifting through, logs and trying to understand how some weird distributed system works and why it's behaving in some weird way, and like spending like weeks doing that with no, success inside, right? And no one to patch it. And then once you like fix it, it's like, oh, okay. And there's like, and you feel nothing because they just finally the struggle is over, right? And there's no reward. Oh, so you fix some bug, right? Great. Like that's pretty hard. It could be, right? It could be pretty draining. So you kind of have to enjoy the process. So if you're just there to make money, like there are probably easier ways in other careers. But yeah. So I would like be kind of mindful of that stuff at least.
Yeah, you just disappointed a lot of people because my Instagram DMs, LinkedIn messages are filled with people. Well, how do I get a tech job? I really want a tech job, a high-paying tech job.
Yeah, and that's fair, right? Like who doesn't want to make money, right? It's nice. Especially like it depends where you start. Like I grew up in a place that like I think people in Canada would consider just abject poverty, right? So like where I'm now to where I grew up, like there's a pretty big difference. And like the tech got me here, right? And like I'm very thankful for that. But like I'm basically just lucky that like for my brain this works, right? Like I know plenty of people for whom like they may think it will be really neat to make a bunch of money doing programming, but they'll be just miserable when they actually get there. And so like they're just doing other stuff that like makes them happy. So I would, yeah, there's definitely like I get the the allure, but just be real with yourself too, right? If you're not enjoying it, likely if it becomes a job, you're probably going to enjoy it less if you're not enjoying it while studying it. So because the studying is that's the nice part, like that's the relaxing part. You take time, you play around, you do stuff that is interesting to you personally. Once you get a job, like there'll be a lot of stuff that you just don't care, right? You don't care if this thing exists, but you have to go and spend a bunch of your life energy making it happen. So like yeah. It's not all roses. What's the saying? H in software engineering stands for happiness. So, and there's no H in software engineering. So, which is like, I don't know, it's not entirely true, but it's for some people it's very true.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Well, I want to transition into another thing, which is how do you keep up to date with this fast-paced industry? I think a while back, every company was like Web 3.0, blockchain. Nowadays, it's like AI. Every single company, like every conference, you hear AI. How do you just keep up with where the tech industry is heading, in terms of like the trends as well as the just what are the upcoming like the latest hot things that are happening in the industry? Like, what's your primary source? Like, how do you?
So, yeah. I think there's an assumption being made that I do keep up with those things.
Definitely. Well, well, my question first, how do you keep up?
Yeah. So yes and no, right? So I read a lot of stuff online. So I for like I don't know, 15 years, I think. Every day I go and visit Hacker News and I read like articles, like it's a website, Y Combinator, which is a startup accelerator, created like a forum back in the day for people to share interesting links and kind of discuss things initially in the startup ecosystem. And then it evolved into this, you know, kind of like just people all over from tech kind of go and read stuff, right? And there's a lot of like, yeah, that's a good way to keep up with like the cutting edge of some fields. They're very they fall prey to a lot of hype, right? So in like, you know, AI is all the hype now, right? So there's gonna be a lot of AI stuff.
Yeah.
So and then you can from there you can kind of connect to deeper communities who like really kind of geek out on the subject, right? And kind of learn more. So Hacker News has been pretty big for me personally, just like learning about, you know, trends and libraries and things. I used to do a lot of web development, and like back in the day, there was a lot of web stuff, and I think there still is, right? Kind of learning about new things. I learned about React there when they just came out, and kind of, you know, played around with it.
And
yeah, so that's
yeah. How much is your interest? Like, do you particularly consume like the new technical stuff that's happening, or is it much more like on a higher level, like at a product scale, like just the new products coming up, or is it more of like the technical part?
I like both. I really like building products, so I'm interested in what people are doing. So I think it's interesting. So I follow that stuff. Like, there's a lot of people like, so that forum, for example, is basically a place where people go and like, oh, I'm building this thing. Like, what do you guys think? I find that pretty interesting. I like, because I built a lot of stuff myself, right? And I shared it out with people, and so it's interesting to see what people are thinking, what problems they're solving for others. I really enjoy the technical dives, and like for me, like the most of this, right, there's not like, I don't really like the AI stuff, for example, right? I don't find it intellectually stimulating because it's very difficult to understand how a lot of this actually works, right? Like it's a kind of a black box in some way. Like if we're talking about like LLMs, right? Like that sort of that flavor of AI, right? But a lot of other techie stuff, you kind of have a, you know, at least a chance of like actually diving through the whole thing and understanding it in depth, right? And so I'm more interested in that content, right? So if I read stuff like right now, I'm building just for myself. I've never really did like a lot of network programming, right? So like I don't want to learn. So I'm building like a BitTorrent engine, or like a client, so BitTorrent client, and I'm learning about like non-blocking IO and how to multiplex IO and stuff, right? Like kind of like lower level, you know, network programming, and like I'm reading a bunch of blogs and articles and stuff on this, and it's pretty interesting, right? And I find that stuff fascinating, and there's plenty of information online about all of this stuff. So like I like deep dives into things much more than like, oh, what's the latest like, I don't know, AI model that came out, and like, because if you're gonna, I don't know, like, because that doesn't give you any kind of fundamental knowledge you can really apply, right? So like, okay, so you know about Claude or whatever, right? Or you know like how to like prompt engineer some like solution to some problem. Like that's useful. It'll only get you that far. Once the thing stops working, right, because you hit the limit of what the LLM can do, right, and then people aren't providing you a better LLM to solve your problem, what are you going to do at that point, right? How are you going to actually make the thing happen? If your sole knowledge is like, I can prompt engineer LLMs, like that's not going to get you very far, right? It will get you to the extent that technology can take you, right? And then beyond that, you're really on your own. And if you don't have any other knowledge, like much more fundamental and kind of, you know, deeper, then you're probably not going to succeed.
Yeah.
So
I would assume like a lot of the hype, especially within the software world, is around people who are new to software, who are like into their journey about learning about computer science. It's like I would imagine like if like I would certainly ask, like I'm hearing AI everywhere, on the radio, news, everywhere. should I be really focusing on like learning web development as a start, or like just learn about AI concepts? Or should I like really spend my time learning about, I don't know, like app development, or like just focus on AI because that's the next big thing. So that would be my
Yeah.
assumption. Like, yeah. So what would be your guidance
I,
there? Is like a good starting point that covers all the fundamentals. So you're good, even if it's like AI, which is the next thing, like blockchains or whatever. So
yeah, so if you look at, you know, like an average software development job, right? You're building some tools to automate some process, to help some business run a bit more efficiently, maybe building a product, right? Like a lot of this stuff uh, doesn't involve anything that's being hyped, right? You don't need to know blockchain, AI systems, whatever, right? Um, and most software jobs are there's like the world basically, right? If you think about the world and how diverse it is, especially like all of the different things humans do, right? All of the businesses and activities, when like and how it all interacts, there's just like endless opportunities to build software to make all of this stuff a bit better, a bit more efficient, right? And so if you're gonna, yeah, so I would basically like the I think the overriding principle has to be, can you take some kind of a, like a thing that's inefficient and make it better, right? Or like, or I don't know, you want to create a tool that helps you do something a bit more, efficiently or faster, or maybe like is actually just helps you do something and it's not possible today. Can you make that happen, right? And like it could be really small, it could be a very simple thing, and it could be just like a few like 100 lines of JavaScript code on a web page, right? Like that could be enough. And that thing could be extremely helpful to some business owner, and they'll pay for it, and they'll hire you to develop that thing, right? So, yeah. So in that sense, most tech jobs and most software jobs are basically around solving problems for real businesses and like other humans, basically, as they interact in the world. And like, yeah, like an AI system or like, some latest AI thing will help you in some circumstances, and like it'll look like magic to people. But like you don't need to chase the stuff. Like there's plenty of other work to do as well. So I would focus on basically like, can you build useful things that solve real problems for people? Like ask around, or like scratch your own itch if you can, right? If sort of like that's a pretty common advice, I think. And then once you start building out, oh, I have some like thing I want to build. Like when I was in university, we had a pretty crummy course management system, right? Like you sign up for courses, they have a bunch of prerequisites, you have to plan out your degree ahead of time, kind of doing a lot of manual work, and it was like super hard to use their online system, right? So I built something that will go and parse course requirements and build nice UIs and let you plan the stuff easier, right? And then like other students use that and found it useful, right? And I did it for myself, and it was fun. And like you learned, like I learned natural language processing, because you have to like, the prerequisites were typed manually by people, right? So like they're all different, right? There's no format. So like you have to process that into like some data structure and like do it reliably, right? And then you learn how to build UIs, how to make that look nice, how to build account systems for people to sign up and manage their like course journey and stuff, right? So like that's like a real thing people struggled with, right? Like people will spend like hours like trying to navigate this stuff, and I found it annoying, and so I just built my own thing. So like that sort of thing will get you much further than like, I don't know, chasing something, right? Like reading about like latest libraries or whatever online. Like that's interesting, but like it doesn't really help you get a job, really, if that's what you care about.
well,
Yeah,
on the job part, that's I think also another
yeah,
increasing question that I'm seeing, which is will AI replace software engineering jobs? Like, will it replace programmers? So
yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. I don't know. I think maybe. Okay, we'll see. How good can it get? Um, I think it's a possibility, right? I think you'll be foolish to say no, or foolish to say yes, right? With any certainty, like it's all developing so quickly, right? I think one thing you can say for sure is that it can make people more productive. and so it can, I think, can create more software jobs as opposed to replace them, right? Like you're able to do more things. You can help more businesses. Like it's like it kind of, in a sense, it lowers the barrier for entry. I think, right? Because like, if you use the LLMs well, they can be kind of a tutor, right? There's like a lot of really sharp edges there, right? They'll just like hallucinate garbage at you, and at least today, right? Maybe in a few years that will solve that problem. Apparently, the Gemini hallucinates a bit less. I don't know. That's what people are saying. There's a lot of hype, right? Anything AI is like, you have to take with a giant grain of salt, right? Like everything is like so hyped up and like over represented, right? Like the capabilities are usually oversold because people have a really vested interest in like selling you like, oh, OpenAI really wants you to regulate them, right? Because they're just gonna like build really dangerous things, but like please stop them before they do that, right? There's like a lot of like that sort of speak, where like, yeah, you can definitely see the self-interest there, right? And like people trying to build regulatory modes and things. So yeah, anyway, where was I going? A bit of a rant.
Yeah, well, you heard it here, folks. Principal software engineer says that it is a possibility. AI.
Oh yeah, and like I played with this stuff a bunch of times, and like it's pretty fun, right? And like you can go and ask it questions about like, oh, how does this subsystem work? And like, I don't know, especially if stuff is well documented. But like you really can't rely on this. You have to go and double check everything, right? Like it can, like the one thing, one good example, right? So I think nowadays people use it to write unit tests a lot, right? Like it's one of the basic things it does fairly well, right? You give it like, oh, I have this function I wrote, write me unit tests for it, and it writes unit tests. I think that's almost doing more harm than good, right? Just like writing unit tests is a really good thing to do yourself, right? Because you're forced to think about how can this, like, what are the edge cases? What are the invariants? How can this break, right? Is this even testable well? Have to kind of build intuition for this stuff, and like it's a really nice thing to go and like type it out yourself, right? Actually press the buttons on the computer, not just ask the thing like, oh, write me a unit test, and it does a bunch of stuff for you, and you commit it, right? Like that, okay, so you've committed a bunch of unit tests. Are they any good? Like, do you have any confidence in them, right? Do you understand the system better? Did you find a few bugs while you're writing them? Like, I don't know, probably no, but they probably are still there. They just, maybe the unit tests that the GPT thing wrote for you didn't, tell you about them. I don't know, right? So it's kind of it's it's a hard topic, right? But at the same time, yeah, like, did you get a bunch of stuff written quickly? Yeah, you did, right? So yeah, so I don't know. I personally, I don't use any of the Copilot stuff or any of the tools like that. I sometimes play with them just to see where they are, just to have like a point of reference of how this is developing. And I find it useful. I find it kind of harmful. Like I disable them for all of my coding projects because like I actually want to write code and I want to think about it. And I don't want this thing to tell me like what to write or like write out, even if it's like basic scaffolding, right? Like if I find myself typing scaffolding code too much, or maybe I should refactor stuff and like think about like how to structure the program in some other way, right? Or maybe it needs to be a DSL, like the domain specific language that I can create for this topic, right? Or like maybe I need to write macros in Rust to like not type out like really ugly functions instead, right? And like, if you're just relying on AIs to write out all of the stuff for you, you're not going to have those experiences. I feel like it limits your understanding of what you're doing. But if you already have that understanding, you can definitely probably use them to be more productive. Yeah, that's so can it replace people? Like, I don't know, maybe. Yeah. we'll find out in like 5-10 years, maybe next year, maybe never.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, I can just continue to ask questions day and out, but I guess we'll just end with this because I respect your time as well. And thanks so much for doing this. I guess we'll just end off with just general advice for people at large. I know we talked about software engineering at specific, like being empathic, not being an a-hole, just being kind to people, thinking about products at a large, thinking about like the business and so on. But just at a human level, like just general life point of view, like just general advice for people, like how can they live a life? Like I guess in your answer, you can think about say like high school or college students, like what are some of the advices there that they can live a fulfilling life, like a rewarding life?
Yeah, I honestly, uh, it's like it's the sort of thing you like. I'm 35 years old, right? You're asking a question of a person who's only just started living, really, right? Like you, that's how I feel anyway. So I don't know how to live a good life, right? I'm learning, or trying to learn anyway. But I think there's some basic ideas that kind of ring true, right? There's like, things are not gonna, um, like focusing on yourself is not gonna give you any fulfillment. That's probably true. Like focus on helping others, right? And like, can you be useful for the world? Like focusing on like, how can I don't know, make the most money, just so I can buy the nice house and the car. Like that's not gonna, okay, so you'll have a nice car. Who cares? Like no one cares about your car. It's probably gonna be too expensive and get you in debt and whatever, right? So kind of just try to leave a world a better place than you saw it, right? Like there's a lot of problems in the world. Like try to be helpful and like kind of fix them when you see them, right? And don't do harm, right? That's a basic thing. Like don't do harmful things. Like don't go work for an oil company. Like well, I don't know. No offense to people who do that, but like uh, I think we need to transition off of that stuff. But basically, some things are probably worse than others, right? As far as careers go. So be mindful of like how you apply your life energy. Right? You only have one life, and you're gonna like at some point you're gonna look back and like, oh, what did I do? Did I like help destroy the world or help make it a bit better? So I think like focusing on family and relationships is always good, right? And also don't like, like a really basic thing that people I think overlook at the younger age is like don't get into debt and focus on being financially dependent. Like if you're dependent on your job for money, like as most people are, right? Then you're very limited in what you can like you if you don't have like ability to just walk away from a job you don't like, right? Because you disagree with it, your manager is mean to you, right? Or they're asking you to do things you don't agree with, right? It's gonna bring you to a pretty bad place, right? If you have to go through all this stuff. So like build an an emergency fund, right? Have much of money in the bank basically to just walk away from bad situations you don't like. That will help you to be a better person, better engineer, better whatever, right? Because you'll have more agency in your life. You'll make better decisions. Like a best car mechanic I've seen was like the most super honest guy. Like he was super honest and really good and nice to deal with because he owned the building, he operated it, right? And like he was not, kind of he wasn't like an economic slave to his landlord, right? He could just like he could just help out people for free if he chose to, right? Because he has that ability, right? And that's really nice, right? It's good for your soul. It's good for the world. So kind of be mindful of that. Like read about finances. Don't get in debt. Save money, right? Don't be like a person who hates their job and can't quit. Basically, that's a pretty bad place to be in. And people don't appreciate that. Like you think you think it'll be okay, but it's really not. For a lot of people, it's pretty detrimental to their health. And money is usually an answer to that. It's like one of the answers, and it's pretty easy. Like just spend less than spend less than you make, basically. But like if you're in university, right, and like you get a new job, like don't go buy a new car. Like that's just a horrible thing to do financially. So basically read about personal finances. It's pretty helpful.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, this is an awesome way to leave it here. Thank
Yeah,
you
sure.
so much. I really appreciate it. Like your time. as well as like just learning lots from you, from your experience, sharing lots of valuable information. So thank you so much.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, anytime. Glad to help.
Perfect.